Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. Are Manchester United in a crisis? Following being knocked out of the Champions League by Sevilla, Manchester United barely got by Brighton in the FA Cup, and you have to question what's going wrong. They're not going to win the Premier League. They got knocked out in the Champions League against Sevilla, and the FA Cup still may be too much of an ask. Is Jose Mourinho the problem? If not, what do they need to fix? Is it the strikers? Is it the attacking midfielders? The actual midfielders? The defense? It can't be the goalkeeper. Are the young players actually good as we expected them to be? Do they really live up to that hype? And what about the midfield? It's been an issue that United have been complaining about for years, and they just haven't found the right solution. Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, I'm going to briefly break down what Manchester United need in the center of the pitch. So when we look at Manchester United and we question what needs to be fixed, we think about the midfield. We look up front, Romelu Lukaku could become a really great striker. You look at the attacking options behind him, some of them are young, but they could become great players. Then you have Alexis Sanchez and Juan Mata, who do complement them with experience, and you expect them to be much better as they go forward next season. You look at the defense, Bailly, Jones, and Lindelof could be great center defenders. And you look at De Gea, he's arguably the best goalkeeper in the world. The fullbacks could get better, but for the time being, they're doing their job well, Antonio Valencia and Ashley Young, but that's an area that they need to address eventually. But you look at the midfield, United have needed a replacement in that area for a very long time. You think about Scholes, you think about Carrick, that's been a very good partnership in the past, but they've never really replaced them. They've never really gotten a driving midfielder that could go from box to box, and that's been their issue over the past few seasons that they've needed to rectify, and they haven't really got the job done. When you look at them this year, Nemanja Matic has been the mainstay. They bought him from Chelsea. Beside him, Paul Pogba hasn't really lived up to the hype that he's been expected to. They paid a world record fee for him. That hasn't worked out. You look at Marouane Fellaini, he's done a job for Mourinho, but can he really be the main guy for United going forward over the long term? And Ander Herrera has gone missing. He hasn't really featured this season. Mourinho hasn't really put him in his plans. Last season he was there because he had to be, but he's not a player that you can really build your squad around and expect to win trophies with. And then Michael Carrick is on his last leg, but who has stepped in recently? It's been Scott McTominay besides Nemanja Matic. When we think about Nemanja Matic, and I've said this prior to the start of the season, Nemanja Matic, Paul Pogba, what you got from them was the fact that Matic would sit, Pogba would like to get forward. It was something similar to what happened with Matic at Chelsea with Cesc Fabregas. What would happen there was that when they would get forward, teams on the counter-attack would be able to expose these areas, drive there, and Matic would be forced to cover too many spaces in that area, and he was overwhelmed. And that's where that side, whether it be Chelsea or Manchester United, would suffer. Earlier on in the season, we saw it in counterattacks where teams would break forward on the counterattack, find spaces into those areas, but what happened was that most of the time it was inferior opposition that they did face, and they were lucky not to concede goals. But we saw it happen. Matic would be covering back, too many spaces, he'd be dragged out to the left, but then there'd be space in the middle to push into the center of the pitch, and then if you push to the right to cover a player there, space there while Pogba's running back to retreat. Initially we thought this season United would be more of a 4-3-3, and that would give Lukaku and then whoever played out wide an opportunity. We'd see Matic probably sit deeper. We'd see Herrera and we'd see Pogba possibly sit in midfield. We don't know why that hasn't been used more often, and that could have been a template for United to use going forward, but it hasn't been the case. We've seen 4-2-3-1, and we've seen cases of 4-2-2-2. We saw that with McTominay. We think about Yeovil when he first started. Obviously that's a great game for him to play in because of a chance to get experience, a chance to get a game, and the fact that they're not the greatest side, and he really did impress. But then we look at the games that he has played in this season. You think about the Chelsea game, and you think about when they did play more of a 4-2-2. And what they did there was that they man-marked in midfield. And what happened was that one would take Willian, one would take Hazard, and it was very key, and they alternated. And that was pivotal because what happens is that those are the two key players for Chelsea. When you really break it down and you really get down to the nitty-gritty of it, who could create for them, who are the players that get it to get the job done for them. Hazard is very key, and you saw Hazard basically rolling around the left. McTominay would track. If Hazard moved to the left, Matic would switch off. Willian would come in. McTominay would step to him, and anything in these areas right here between the lines was swallowed up by Matic and McTominay. They did a great job. United scored goals off of two Christensen mistakes. They didn't really create much throughout the game. Besides that, they did have a few chances here and there, but besides that, there wasn't really any dominance. There wasn't any control. That was a big issue, but United got the job done there. That was key. You think about the game against Liverpool, same kind of aspect, same kind of result, and what happened was that you had the wide players kind of marked out a position there. And what McTominay and Matic did was that they screened this area. If one pushed out there, they would push out with him. But besides that, they really did a good job in this area. They ensured that Liverpool's midfield never really got a kick. They made sure that balls weren't coming in. The wingers stayed tight. Firmino couldn't really get forward. If Salah moved into that area, one of them would pick him up. But for the most part, they had that area locked down. And then when you look at the chances that United scored, it was more Route 1 football. Think about the flick on that Rashford caught onto. You think about Rashford picking up that loose ball after Lukaku again won a long ball. But again, they didn't really create much. They weren't in real control of the match. They sat deeper in the second half. In the first half, they relied on long balls going forward, and that was very key for United. But when you think about McTominay, the one game that he did miss, or the one game that he did miss this season where United lost, you think to the game against Sevilla. He played in the first leg, they sat deeper, they got the 0-0 result, they did concede a few chances, most of it came from wide areas opposed to the center of the pitch. And the second game, that was a bit different. United were 4-2-3-1, they're basically 4-1-4-1. And basically what had happened was that Mourinho decided to go with Lingard and Fellaini in midfield ahead of Matic. Fellaini for his aerial presence, they had him play a bit higher up the pitch. Lingard is more of a functional player rather than an actual midfielder. So what happened is that he was getting forward as well. They had a lot of players higher up the pitch, but they weren't pressing. So when guys like Banega and Zanti got on the ball, they had time and space, and it just didn't make any sense. And they're able to play passes. And what happened in that game was the fact that 1, 2, 3. So whether it was Sarabia, whether it was Correa, whether it was Muriel dropping in, there were too many players in that midfield for Matic to pick up. United were scrambling in center areas of the pitch. They were overloaded, and Sevilla always had an opportunity to counter. They always had an opportunity to pick up the ball in the midfield, and Matic was left scrambling because these two were higher up the pitch. That is a game where obviously United needed to attack. They should have provided a better attacking options going forward, and should have played better. So you can't really say that McTominay warranted a start, but if they were going to play like that, and Mourinho knew that, McTominay was a perfect player to have in there to sit with Matic and to ensure that if one went there, one was there, and they just had a bit of a base. They didn't have that. They were overrun on several occasions. These two were always tracking deeper and trying to get back into position, trying to recover their runs, but it didn't work out. They were eventually punished. You look at the goal that they do concede, it's a giveaway in midfield, and then no one is there to really stop the run, and Ben Yedder scores eventually. That's the problem with United. But the other aspect to it is why Mourinho didn't start him there is because earlier on, a previous game in the Premier League where they did go more of a 4-3-3 with Sanchez and Rashford out wide and Lukaku up front against Crystal Palace, they didn't really get that much from them. It's because Crystal Palace sat a bit deeper and more of a 4-4-2. And what happened was that they had They had Pogba, they had McTominay, they had Matic, and there was no real need for them. They weren't really doing much. Matic was sitting deeper, McTominay was deeper, Pogba was getting onto the ball, but United weren't creating anything. It was actually Lingard that played with Alexis, and they had them a bit narrow. Really couldn't get on the ball. They were more of a 4-4-2 then, and they had a striker there. Not much was really being created there. Pogba wasn't really getting forward and offering much in that respect. And then when you look at Matic and McTominay, just simple, plain passes, sideways passes. And when you really analyze it, they weren't getting much from the midfielder. They could have brought another attacker, and they did bring on Rashford eventually to play to the left. And then they had Pogba and Matic there, and that's because Palace weren't really offering much. They had two strikers up front, not really winning any balls in the air, not really offering much of a threat. So they didn't need an extra midfielder in there, and they can have Pogba push a bit forward because they didn't really have a counter-attacking threat, and Matic could sit a bit deeper, and they recovered the game and won 3-2. But when you really analyze what Scott McTominay brings to you and the options that Manchester United have, you have to look at it like this way. If Mourinho is not willing, we look at Manchester City, you see David Silva, you see Kevin De Bruyne playing as number 10s in a center midfield role. If they do not want to have Matic there, and if they don't want to bring back, let's say, a Juan Mata to play a central midfield role, maybe with Pogba, give them something a bit different. They don't really have many options there that could really control a game from central midfield. You look at it, Pogba and Matic just isn't going to work because Matic, contrary to belief, is more of a deep creator. He likes to pull the strings from deep. He's a really great passer. You look at the goal, you look at the FA Cup performance, Brighton, again, we see Matic and McTominay, not much going for them. United never really controlled the game. Pedestrian possession, no real creative chances from deep, but it's Matic who scores, who creates the goal with the first touch lob into the box for Lukaku. Superb pass that you don't expect from a center defensive midfield. And you look at the finish that he did after that for the Ashley Young goal in the second half, a great header. But McTominay, for all his great attributes, his great ability to understand his position, role player who gets the job done, gets stuck in, doesn't really offer much in terms of passing yet. The penetrative pass, the ability to storm forward into midfield, the ability to score goals from midfield. He doesn't have that to his arsenal yet. So when you look at their options up front, in midfield, Pogba can't really give the protection to Matic without staying deeper. He doesn't really have that discipline, so they need someone else in there to play with him. Fellaini over the long term isn't the option. Ander Herrera's United career looks pretty much finished. He could be revived and maybe play him in a 4-3-3 and try that again, but to win a Premier League title, is Ander Herrera the main guy you want in your midfield? And then you look at McTominay and Matic. From a defensive aspect, superb in the big games, can destroy games and help United grind things out. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, for McTominay's ability and his discipline and his understanding to play a role, he yet doesn't have the goal-scoring ability. He doesn't have the passing range to really dictate the tempo of the game from a deeper position and control games at this level, and he doesn't have the dynamism to really get forward, break into challenges, and offer something in the final third. So when you look at it, McTominay and Matic look to be like the best option for them in the bigger games, to destroy space in between the lines and to negate the opposition's best threat in the final third, but they need something else. Perhaps another player who could do the role, provide the role that McTominay doesn't have yet, because again, the goals, the creativity from deep, and the drive from midfield isn't there, and they don't get that discipline from Paul Pogba, and something needs to be addressed if United want to go to the next level, win the Premier League, and challenge for Champions League crowns. But let me know what you guys think. Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.